First off, welcome. Thank you so much for staying until the bitter end on a Friday. I appreciate it. I am a contractor. I specialize in React, React Native, and GraphQL. And it's always a pleasure to be invited to speak about something that I will chat the ear off of anyone, at any time, any day, anyway. So today we're going to talk about NextJS, which is one of my favorite technologies right now. So let's go ahead and get started. How are we going to do this? One, we're going to go over some comparisons, basically building off of a little bit of what was previously discussed today. We'll do a little bit of fun with that. We'll go over some of the key capabilities of NextJS, like the cool stuff that it can do, and then some tips and tricks for when you actually get started. So let's begin. Obviously, this is something that we all face constantly, all the time, as front-end developers. My husband likes to joke, so what is the JavaScript framework this week? And it's a little disturbing how often he is not wrong. But we can kind of take a look at the madness. We can try and step back a little bit, and we can second guess, but with some facts to back that up. So first step back, why are we here today talking about React? We know that there are several popular options right now. And they all have a lot of key similarities. They're both JavaScript frameworks that kind of have similar takes on what you need to build a modern front end. And they actually all started at the similar time, definitely a zeitgeisty kind of thing. Two are backed by some of the biggest tech entities on the planet. One is unique in that it is scrappy and not. And like everyone else, we are completely ignoring right now that AngularJS ever existed. All right, so I promised data. We can always first start on anything as a, well, are other people talking about it? Let's look at Google Trends data. And that gives us actually a lot right off the bat. So you can kind of see the evolution of how this horse race has been going over the past few years. This is starting off in 2014 and going to basically earlier this week. You can see that Angular started off strong and has been holding steady, but React has slowly but surely and very steadily become more and more popular. Also, kind of a key feature that you might notice, we're missing one of the contenders. Unfortunately, is not yet popular enough for Google Trends to also recognize it as a web framework. So I do not have the data to properly add this or add Vue to this data or comparison. But there are more data sets that we can take a look at. So what repositories are out there that actually use React or Angular? And we can look to GitHub for that data. And we see that Vue is making a good showing. Like you can see, it's comparable with Angular in terms of repositories that depend on it. But again, this is A, what people are talking about, which may be lies. And this is B, GitHub data that's completely aggregate. You can't get this data for any particular range of time. But there's another data set that you can. So actual NPM downloads for the past 6 months. If we take a look at this, we can see that React is definitely just gaining in popularity. But Vue and Angular have comparable and still substantial use worldwide. Another thing, by the way, going into this rabbit hole of, hey, let's look at data to second guess my own career paths. It is a rabbit hole. You can go forever. A fun thing that I found, so this is comparing basically 2016 versus 2019. I could make a political joke here, but I won't. But whatever. Key takeaway here is my team is winning. Our team is winning. Yay, React. But moving on to the actual question of the day is, so why would we choose this particular scaffolding framework of a framework? Why Next.js? Comparing it with the other contenders in this race, and I'm going to give a shout out for Jared Palmer's Razzle and After.js. Really good thinking. It just didn't quite catch on, and solo repos are really hard to get off the ground and keep there. So, but thumbs up for trying. We have Next, which is an open source framework, but backed by a company, Zeit. Zeit has another set of services, so like Zeit Now for deployments and handling. So it's backed by a pretty major contender in the space. I guess the equivalent would be something backed by Heroku or DigitalOcean. There's people behind there supporting this. Create React app, backed by Facebook. So again, it's got a behemoth behind it. It is well supported, well thought out, and hugely popular. And we have Gatsby, which was also mentioned earlier today. It is now backed by a VC-backed company. They're attempting to do the Gatsby cloud and monetize, so that's really interesting to watch. Again, you can see that all of these projects were created kind of around the same time and in the same vein of, well, yeah, we have React, but as anyone who's done the first couple of let's build a React app completely from scratch and figure out Webpack from the ground up, you never want to do that more than once. So yeah, so here are the solutions that people have come up with and been working on over the past few years, and they're all, at this point, pretty good. But again, let's take a look at the data. So Google Trends tells a story that is very believable. So you can see in the blue, we have Create React App, which started off first. It started strong, and it's staying pretty strong. We have Gatsby in the yellow, a little bit of a latecomer, but it is, it's got some substantial popularity. And then we have, again, Next.js, which seems to be very steadily rising through the ranks. It is most recently actually more popular than Create React App in terms of Google Trends, which again, these are hearsay, these are conversations. Just like Twitter data, it can lie. So, yeah. If you look at, right. Point of clarification, this is actually looking at repos that are dependent on React scripts, not just Create React App as in the CLI. But you can see that, again, this is aggregate. This is since the beginning of time. And of course, Create React App has been around for far longer. But basically, the Create React App ate the web's lunch in terms of market share. But this is really interesting as well. So if you look at the past 6 months and you kind of hone in on NPM downloads, this is a very different picture, right? So again, everyone wants a single page application. But Gatsby and Next actually have, pretty nice market share. And what's really mind-boggling is how big Next.js's download share is compared to its GitHub repository share. This to me was extremely interesting. Can anyone else imagine why you would have a lot more repositories using Gatsby, but just as many downloads from NPM?
Private sites?
Private sites are going to be one of them, yeah, definitely. Everyone's got their open source Gatsby blog, and yeah, it's just out there. But what's the other potential? Getting started. Yeah, but what I'm really thinking of is it's not a one-to-one usually between a person and a repository. To me, this says that there are fewer repositories, but there are a lot more people working on each one. And this makes sense. When you think about it, Gatsby is used for a lot of smaller projects, personal blogs, specific bits of information that have to be posted in a very accessible manner and on the cheap. Next.js is for the enterprise. You have a lot of people often working on these repositories together. You have a lot of build tools that are also doing, the checks, downloading Next and doing all the build stuff. Next is used by more complex, larger teams. Which begs the next question: why? What is Next.js doing, and apparently doing pretty well, that would make it a compelling reason or a compelling use case for larger teams? And basically, it's all about flexible scalability. It's nice if we take a look at what's actually going into a performant app. If we want to optimize for a large number of use cases, a large number of users, maybe we have to think about mobile. Maybe we have to think about people with crappy data connections. Maybe we have to think about people with subpar devices. So what are we doing to solve that problem? Well, first of all, we can just shrink it, right? We have code splitting. So we can actually just make the problem smaller at any given point in time. We can also shift the problem. So we can take it from the device back to the server. And that can also help lower the requirements and improve performance. And then, of course, like what Gatsby's doing, whenever you can deploy something statically, totally do it. S3 is cheap. It's so cheap. You might as well not have to process something over and over and over again when you can only just do it once. Flip side of that, what helps the developer side of the equation? How do developers all work on something for a Fortune 100 company that's being used by millions of people all over the world? How do you help them build that faster, more reliably, and with fewer issues? So when I'm looking at packages and things like that to use for a new project, I've got two criteria in mind. One is I really want an expert to have packaged up their expertise for me. I want them to have put a little bow on it and make it easy for me to understand, easy for me to implement, and hard for me to screw up. One of the things, my favorite example of this is Formic. Forms are hard, and you never think about it until you've seen a form that screws up. And it can screw up in a number of different interesting ways. So you really want your team especially to have one framework that they repeatedly use, that they have enough expertise on to not screw up, and to ship quickly. So, put a bow on it, ship it so that I can use that part of your brain. And it does need to be a little bit flexible, right? So that's one reason that Gatsby has been so popular, is it's really pushed the plug-in angle. Not only are people packaging up things that you can use so you don't have to reinvent that particular wheel, but they're doing that in a fairly flexible way and in a fairly really developer-friendly format. And that's what Next.js also does really, really well. You basically need to know 5 things about your app to get going in a pretty powerful manner. And all of these are questions that you should pretty much know fairly quickly or right off the bat. And you probably have opinions on most of these things anyway. So you should probably know your authentication strategy. You should probably know what your persistent layout is going to be. You have your favorite Webpack things. Which pages are going to need to be packed with data before being shipped out, and which ones are just static. And then we'll get to deployment later. So if you can answer these questions, you actually get so much out of the box. This is just the default Next.js npm run build script. You can see it is dead simple, and it gives you some great information right out of the box. So you build, and then you have static files, pre-rendered, just like Gatsby. And then you have server. The sigma, that means that the page will be server rendered, and Next.js has pre-built you a little Lambda to do just that. If you have data, it will go ahead and fetch it, and then it will server-side render, and then it will ship it out to the user. When I talk about Next.js, there's a lot of misconceptions, often based on things that were definitely true and limitations that were there like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, but they're not there anymore. Next.js 9, which came out over the summer, is just stupid impressive. It's really nice, and it can do a lot of nice things. It now has 100% TypeScript capability. Like the entire core has been rewritten in TypeScript. Go for it. If you want it, great. If you don't have to. You can always add stuff to Babel. You can use basically whatever CSS solution you prefer. Just add the right plugin. If you don't want to deploy with static content and microservices, you want to use your own custom server, go for it. There are examples in the repo, lots of them, and everything is pretty well updated and maintained. The repository literally has an examples folder where the community has been fantastic about just throwing up, here's how you get started with Express, here's how you get started with this thing, here's how you get started with Apollo and authentication or something like that. Definitely go check it out. And this last one's a little bit misleading. You aren't limited to Zeit's Now service, which is, if you haven't heard of it, take a look. It's really impressive. It's like a nicer, cleaner Heroku or something like that. It's multi-cloud, so it's basically a thin layer on top of AWS and GCP and all those things. But if you need to, build your artifacts and then send them to DevOps for your particular cloud, and they use your own accounts for Amazon or whatever, you can do that. That's all good. All right, so if you want to, this is a GitHub repo with a workshop that I gave a little while ago. Please go take a look if you wanted to get started with Next.js. It has 4 chapters, so to speak, of just like example demo content. It pre-packages nice things like linting and how to work with styled components and things like that. So go take a look. But the TLDR from all of that is there are 2, I guess, challenges is a little bit of a misnomer. There are things that you have to think about a little bit differently with Next.js than people are used to, especially coming from the ubiquitous Create React app. One is routing. You cannot use React Router. It doesn't work. There was an initiative to try and get it to kind of work together and maybe do that, and it didn't. It failed. Routing is different, and I'm going to explain why. And the other one is fetching data. Again, this is no longer a single page application. You are thinking about data both client and server side, and that just requires a little bit of different thinking. But there are tools to handle that. All right, so how does writing actually work with a Next.js project? And I mean, fundamentally, it's stupid simple. It's this directory called pages. Your pages of the app are your pages in this directory. And the next builder will say, OK, cool, and it will just handle it from there. You can nest routes. This is a simple example. There's only like 1 layer of depth. You can turtle it all the way down. There's no real limitation there. Unlike React Router, one of the things that trips people up is that this is nested, but it's not in combination. So you can't have, dashboard with under the folder, my account, and then have persistent dashboard, and then preferences, settings, and my billing. the final page is the one that's rendered. So if you want to do a combination, you have to actually go in and have some fun with the app override. And again, that kind of goes into the workshop if you want to take a look at the repo. You can do some nice things with URL management. And you have something called, or you can have dynamic routes. So if you take a look and you see this in brackets, post ID, that's a dynamic route. NextJS can automatically handle this as kind of a variable-ish figure. So whatever you send in to this page, it can process and then handle that both in the URL and the content. The docs are very comprehensive and really interesting. I highly recommend going through them. But the TLDR that you would need to understand routing is taking a look at the router component and the link component. These two are key for making your pages work in a Next.js application the way that they really nicely should. You can see that link helps you hook into like a component or a page lifecycle that can handle a few things out of the box without you having to think about it. For example, the error page is prepackaged. You don't have to think about it, although you can customize it if you like. The router component is great. So the API is very simple and straightforward. You can access it through either a hook or a higher order component. And you can also use it to hook into events, which is super useful if you want to do like nice little loading animations or page transitions or things like that. So you do need these two tools, but they're pretty simple and pretty powerful. Also, thinking of data, even with server-side rendering, there is something called the get initial props. So it's literally just a little static method that you can add to your pages. You can only add it at the page level. You cannot add it at the subcomponent level, just FYI. But all you do is you can put in, data fetching or other information that you need here, and then it will automatically let you know, or let the system know that this needs to be server-side rendered and it needs to fetch this data and deliver it to the page in this manner when it goes. And you can see that directly in the build. So we have here now the Sigma for repos, our page here. It's because of the presence of get initial props, that's a flag for the builder, that this is now a microservice. It cannot be rendered as just static content. And a little bit more information, the TLDR about get initial props. Key takeaway here, you can access this context object, which is handy. It can help fetch the right data. And then this is only for server rendering or client-side routing via link or router. So you can't just have your typical link HTML in there. The Next.js app won't know to hook into the proper things. And just to wrap up, there's a not-so-secret bonus feature, which is new and exciting because once you have to go and develop a microservice and put it in AWS and manage all of its security things and all of that stuff, you never want to do it again. So now you don't have to. You can go into your pages directory, you can add a folder called API, and you can add stuff in there that then you can call elsewhere as just a microservice API that's just kind of handled for you along with the rest of the app. And again, you can see in the build, it said, oh, hey, you have another microservice. I'm going to treat it just like any other Lambda, and here it is. This is really great. It helps with, it's a really easy security update because you're basically lifting some of your key information outside of the app in a way that's really easy to access still and to use. So no putting in your API keys into your client anymore. All right, and then I really like what Next has done to support and kind of scaffold for the community. So their website is awesome. Their documentation is really good. They have, if you check it out here, their Learn category. They literally have an online course that kind of shows you and gives you a hands-on experience and quizzes on how to deal with some of these fundamental features and get going. And it's always getting updated, and it's always relevant for the latest version. Also, their GitHub repo is amazing as well. Again, there's the examples folder and everything else. I find a lot of really interesting information just in the issues. They've been really helpful. And then, of course, they used to have Slack. They went off of Slack and they went onto Spectrum Chat. And that is very, very active and extremely helpful. All right. And thanks so much for sticking with me. It is almost the end of the day. You are almost there. And I hope it's been a pretty valuable 30 minutes.